And thank you for joining us here on PM Express once again on the day, of course, when what we've seen transpire in the last 24 hours keeps snowballing when it comes to the Ejura killings that we now know has claimed 2 lives in the protest yesterday. And in addition, of course, we know that the social media activist Kaka, who, of course, whose death triggered this, has led to a major national conversation. We are at a point where the president has been forced to act, and he has directed a public inquiry into the events of yesterday that left 2 people dead. And we're learning a bit more about this public inquiry because we know that it's been directed at the Interior Minister, who has 10 days to finish this inquiry, and his deadline is the 9th of July. He must wrap up that inquiry by the 9th of July and hand the report back to the president for action. And of course, we know that it's on the back of the killing of 2 people in the protest yesterday. And this is a public inquiry, so we're expecting that there will be a public sitting, and we'll bring that live to you here on the Joy News channel. But we know that there are others who object to this approach. The minority say this isn't the approach to take on such a serious matter. They are asking for a commission of inquiry. What's the difference? And will that make any significant difference that a public inquiry will not achieve? We'll get into that shortly here on PM Express. Now, the IGP, there's been accountability mechanisms that we've seen rolled out today. The IGP and Interior Minister have both been before the Public Accounts Committee. He's been speaking about the circumstances under which the police are allowed to use lethal force. He says, and the circumstances where your police determine that the demonstrators, some of them have offensive weapons, they are allowed under the law to eliminate that threat using lethal force. The most important question to ask, though, is, was that the case yesterday? Because we saw, as I demonstrated for you on the screens yesterday, we saw armed police officers appearing to fire into the crowd when they crouched in a position to target and shoot. That definitely is one that has been condemned widely by almost everybody in this particular country. And we know that the IGP has been speaking. We also know that the IGP's position on the matter is that they have a manual that should guide the police in these matters, and that, if be it lawful or unlawful protest, there are steps that needs to be taken on the matter. Now, these are the laid out procedure as the IGP himself laid it out today. What's the first thing you do? Use a megaphone. Use a megaphone and ask the people to disperse. If you watch television in the West, in the US, when there's protests, you actually hear the police using the loudspeaker. The key question to ask is, was this process followed yesterday? I mean, from the videos that we've seen, obviously this wasn't the one that was followed. The IGP himself laid this out. And so the key question to ask him is, if this is the procedure, why didn't your men follow that? What we saw on the screens is the military arriving, police follows, and instantly firing into the air first, and then later at a position that can kill or maim people. And he says spray guns, tear gas, black armor when things escalate. And you wonder, the police officers who went to the scene, the only thing we saw is using the water cannons that was used. What about tear gas? They didn't even deploy that. What about rubber bullets? That wasn't deployed. They went straight from the water cannon straight to live rounds. Straight to live rounds. This is our security services dealing with civilians who were protesting, exercising their constitutional right to do so. Step 3 is to use live armor. That is only if you can determine that the people, some of them indeed have offensive weapons and they can cause harm to the police. Now, it says these does not prevent the security of officers from protecting themselves. That's a fundamental principle in policing. We've seen the condemnation across board. Occupy Ghana had done so. We see that 4 persons, I mean, just to recap this, has been left injured. One is still on admission. One has been transferred to Komfo Teaching Hospital, and 2 have been discharged. So that's good news, right? This is just the picture from yesterday. So today we're going to be looking into this. 24 hours ago, everybody was asking the question, so what should happen, right? What should happen? Should this be treated as business as usual? Well, we're getting a public inquiry. We didn't get a public inquiry into the Techiman shooting, where people died too. Now there's one. But is this enough? My guest will be seated shortly, and we'll get into these very important critical matters. Stay with us. And thank you very much for staying with us here on PM Express. My guest joining me this evening is, in the studio with me is James Agaga, who is the ranking member on the Defense and Interior Committee. He's also the member of Parliament. This is in the Upper East region. Which constituency again is that? Busa North. Yeah. Yes, Busa North. I'm delighted that he can join us. Also joining me on Zoom is Alexander Fenyo-Markin. He's a Deputy Majority Leader and also a member of the Defense and Interior Committee in Parliament. I'm also delighted to be joined by Dr. Ishmael Norman, who is President of the Institute for Security, Disaster and Emergency Studies in the Central Region. Also joins us via Zoom. Let's look at what has happened in the last today, in fact. James, let me ask you about the President's issuance of that directive to the Interior Minister for the public inquiry. I know today the Minority Leader held a press conference to say, as far as he's concerned, the minority is concerned, that inquiry, a public inquiry, isn't the solution to this. You prefer a different approach.
Yes, Evans, and the reasons are simple and straightforward. The President's directive clearly requires the ministers to establish a ministerial committee to look into the shootings that happened at Ejura. And now, if you take into account the nature of the problem that has unfolded before our eyes, and it's still unfolding anyway, clearly it's a fluid situation. I pray that tempest will calm down and the peace restored quickly to Ejura, but it's very frightening. Now, if you consider the fact that the matter requires us to even have ministers, the ministers responsible for security, appear as witnesses to help us unravel the circumstances that led to the shootings, you'd understand why a ministerial committee may not be appropriate. Because the sector minister, and here I'm talking about the Minister for the Interior, would have to superintend over the affairs of that ministerial committee. If it becomes necessary for him to appear as a witness before that very committee, don't you think, I mean, he might be conflicted in that sense? That is why we think that, look, in the absence of, let's say, a police complaints commission, and I've always advocated for one to be established, we need to have a commission of inquiry, which would be able to do a full, impartial, and faithful inquiry. Mind you, the commission of inquiry is clothed with certain powers that the ministerial committee may not be clothed with. Powers such as the exercise of the powers of a high court to order for the production of documents, to compel the attendance of witnesses, subpoena them if you like. The ministerial committee, it is arguable, may not have any legal backing to enforce the attendance, compel the attendance of witnesses and the production of documents. So that is one setback that the ministerial committees could suffer. And so we think that there ought to be a full-blown inquiry, and the way to go is a commission of inquiry. Look, the President says the ministerial committee He didn't specifically say so, but that is what
He
was
simply said
driving
a public inquiry.
Look, he's giving them 10 days within which to complete their work and present a report. Now, if you consider the magnitude, the convoluted nature of the problem, I doubt whether 10 days is sufficient for any committee of inquiry
I mean, the president wanted to convey the urgency of the situation. You don't want this to linger any longer.
No. We are talking about long-standing challenges that confront the security sector, crowd control, issues which have to do with crowd control. And so, if you treat this as a matter of urgency, and so therefore you stampede the inquiry, you're not going to have a full and an impartial inquiry in the process. They're going to rush over the issues and give you a half-baked report, which will not serve our interests in the long run. So we're saying
that the terms of reference here is very circumscribed to the yesterday's riot, yesterday's shooting, right, and the protest and what happened that led to the deaths. Because he says here that a public inquiry into the circumstances that led to the unfortunate occurrences of, it's very specific. So just that, not the broad issues with police handling of, crowds.
But Evans, whether you like it or not, the police handling of the crowds would come in handy.
But specific to the crowd of yesterday.
Yes, specific to the crowd of yesterday. Yeah. The police fired live ammunition into the crowd. We shouldn't have happened. No. That particular incident must be interrogated. And if the issue is properly interrogated, it is expected that the committee would make far-reaching recommendations, which in the final analysis should result in security sector reform, police reform, if you like it. But here you see that the military was involved, so security sector reform. You cannot do that within the space of 10 days. 10 days is woefully inadequate. That is why we think the ministerial committee that the president wants set up may not serve, the purposes for which he wants it set up. Let us come under the Constitution, set up a commission of inquiry. And I've heard many people say, commission of inquiry. Yeah. What happened to the Milshot Commission of Inquiry?
I'm sure you understand people's skepticism about Commission of Inquiry, because we've just had one recently that you called for and the minority, everybody called for. It was set up and has yielded next to nothing.
Look, Evans, it is better to have a Commission of Inquiry do this work than a ministerial committee. It is even easier to shelve a ministerial committee's report than a Commission of Inquiry's report. Because
except that in the Commission of Inquiry, the president, again constitutionally, needs a white paper. And a white paper by definition means he's going to choose and pick.
Yes.
But a public inquiry, it's his own minister who set it up.
Yes.
He almost is. It
on
whose
terms? On whose terms?
On his terms. And
on so the minister's terms?
On the minister's and the president's terms. Yes. I guess, and also because it's public and the cameras are there, we all see how this pans out. Politically dangerous to take your own committee that you control and everything and say, I'm not going to implement the recommendation. You don't see that. Evans, you don't see that.
Evans, I don't see
that intricacy.
If you consider the fact that the police did not deploy themselves to Ejura, the military didn't deploy themselves. They were deployed on the orders of officialdom. The political leadership of the security agencies may have had a hand in their deployment.
Yeah. And the interior minister is ultimately...
Ultimately, responsible.
For the police.
Yes, for the police. Defense minister responsible for...
the military.
And to a certain degree,
ultimately the president.
For national security.
Yeah, true.
Now, I don't see how a ministerial committee can say the minister who is going to inaugurate it, to do its work, to appear before it and testify. That is why I said the minister may be conflicted in that sense. Which is why you need a body which has nothing to do with ministerial oversight to look into this matter. Because the nature of the problem requires that the ministers responsible for our security are questioned. Yes, they must be questioned. But if it is the same minister who is going to set up the committee, I mean, who is going to have the audacity to question him?
But must they, though? Must the Minister of Security, must the Interior Minister, must the Defense Minister, the political heads be questioned this matter when there were technical security officers in command who were making the decisions as it happened in the actual incident?
You know, there are root causes to what we saw at Ejura. So if you confine yourself to the immediate causes, you may lose sight of the problem. The refusal on the part of the state to allow fix the country movement hold a demonstration is partly to blame for the problem.
So I'm going to come to the bigger issue shortly, but let me get other views on the position that Mr. Funyo Markin was supposed to join us. I'm now learning that he's not on, but let's bring in the Ishmael Norman, who is with us now. Mr. Norman, from your expert opinion, where do you stand on this divide between the government's choice of a public inquiry and the minority's suggestion that that is a wrong way to go? We should look at a commission of inquiry.
Evans, thank you for the opportunity, and greetings to Honorable Agaga, good friend. What the former Deputy Minister of Interior is saying is actually true, that the Minister of Interior is a person of interest. It is under his ministry that this whole thing happened. So if he is the one who is going to chair the investigation, how do we find his culpability in all of this? So I think in the interest of probity and accountability, transparency, we may have to opt out for a commission of inquiry, because a lot of things internally are going to be swept under the carpet. It's esprit de corps. They're going to protect their own. People who are responsible are not going to own up to it. They're going to find language to cover themselves. So to keep it very simply, because this is not really something that should be debated for long, because everybody knows that the police cannot act without the Minister of Interior getting involved. The police is under the Minister of Interior. So the buck stops with him. Therefore, he is using criminal balance, criminal justice balance. He's a person of interest. He needs to be questioned. He needs to be interrogated. What order did he give? Who gave the order? Was he aware of the order? And if he wasn't aware, why not? I think he is not the right person to chair the inquiry.
But you raise a very important point about the possibility, and because you work with them, you know that the police and the military, they protect their own, and so the possibility of there's almost of a cover-up is high, and I guess that's why the argument about presidential commission is interesting, because there you swear an oath, you know, and you suffer the penalty of perjury if it's found. Committee of, inquiry, public inquiry lacks that sort of compulsion of law that could ensure that people are closer to the truth than anything else. I guess it strengthens your case that a commission of inquiry is always needed.
Certainly. I was happy that at least the president took an action on this, but not the right action. It is designed to cover up people who are culpable. And if this continues, the youth is upset, or the youth are upset. If we don't find good solution to the upsettedness, this conflict between the establishment and the youth will continue. And we have to stop it, because Ghana is the only country we got. A commission of inquiry is probably the best forum for this. I don't see how the Minister of Interior is going to turn around and question himself. I don't see how the chief of defense staff is going to turn around and question himself. So again, this is not an issue for internal investigation. This goes beyond internal investigations. Commission of inquiry should be the way to go.
But I asked the question.
It will be done.
I asked the question earlier. I asked the question earlier. Must the political heads testify? Wasn't this? I mean, this was a live incident in which, and your security expertise there, the commanders, the technical officers and commanders in charge were making instant live decisions in a very fluid situation. Must the political heads necessarily testify in this matter? Shouldn't we leave it to the actual technical people who make the decisions, and the evidence of the military officers who were seen firing into the crowd should be held responsible? Must the political heads get involved?
All of them. When the good things happen, the political heads take credit. When bad things happen, they should take the blame as well. Who put the dissect together? Who controls the dissect? They do. So I think this is not the time to draw lines. Everybody who is involved within the chain, within that circle, should be interviewed, should be questioned, should be interrogated.
I mean, but I get the point. But where should the focus be?
The focus should be on everyone. Who gave the order? That's where it starts from. Mm-hmm. Nothing could happen at Ejura without the knowledge of the Minister of Interior.
But isn't that a long stretch to say that nothing happened there without his knowledge? When there was, you think practically the deployment of the military would have, he would have known before?
You have the right person next to
he was a deputy interior minister. I'll come to that. If that in right, let me ask you. Hold on. Would you? I find it impracticable, right, to think that the interior minister, who, by the way, yesterday when this was happening, was at there was an event he was at Aqua Safari when this was happening. You think it's practicable that he would have known in real time, he would have been involved in the decision-making processes in Ejura?
Look.
Is that realistic?
Look, let me indicate quickly that, look, there are levels of responsibility.
Yeah.
So, and Dr. Norman clearly alluded to the existence of dissects, rexecs, and so on.
Yeah.
So, at that level, you have the dissect. The dissect is chaired by a political figure,
True.
The municipal or district chief executive. Then at the regional level, you have the RECSEC, which is chaired by the regional minister. So the decision to deploy police and soldiers at the same time definitely must have been discussed. They must have gathered some intelligence and acted upon the intelligence at the level of either the dissect or RECSEC.
But this was a fluid situation.
Minister,
yes, okay.
Is that, look, he is responsible for police. Essentially, he's the minister for police.
True.
Affairs.
True.
So wherever the police are involved in an operation, the district commander will report to regional commander, and that's the chain. Whether a decision is taken at the level of RECSEC or dissect, the minister for the interior is part of the chain. And the buck will stop with him. He receives reports on a daily basis.
But in this live...
About the involvement of the police.
Yeah, but in this live, fluid situation, he would certainly not have been involved in the decision-making process.
Well, that is why...
Best case scenario,
so
he gets briefed after the event.
Let's not confuse the issues.
Yeah.
We're not saying the minister is culpable.
Okay.
But for you to be able to establish that he was not culpable in any way, he must be subjected to the investigative process. But from the outset, if it's left out of the equation, because he is the one to superintend over the investigation, you miss the point. You're going to have a half-baked report which wouldn't serve any useful purpose. So that is the problem. And that is why we think we must have a full-blown inquiry. Let's have a commission of inquiry. which is clothed with all the powers provided for under the Constitution. They can compel attendance, compel you to produce documents, so on and so forth. There will be no cover-ups at that point. We also how extensive the work of the Milshot Commission of Inquiry was. You appeared as a witness.
I did.
And you testified to the fact that the procedure at that level is very rigorous.
Yeah.
But at the level of a ministerial committee, you may not even understand what procedure is used there.
Because it's spelled out by law. This one, the commission is, the procedure is there for you.
It's there for you.
Self-evident.
But at the level of a ministerial committee,
it's subjective.
It's subjective.
I mean, I get the argument. But this is the president's decision as of now. Then he has 10 days. I mean, let me ask Ishmael Norman. He'll come out shortly on that. But you've already commented on the time frame that I'll get his thoughts on that very shortly. But there's another fundamental issue here, right? About what the focus should be. Should the focus be? He says equally everybody else must have the equal attention, either the political decision makers and the technical people. But ultimately, the political head takes glory, as he says, if it's good, if it's bad. But we must be prepared to hold the police officers we train for this purpose and put in command to supervise what it must be held more accountable.
Look, Evans, at this moment, it is difficult to narrow down the focus of the investigation to say only the police officers.
I mean, so who gave the order for the firing, for example?
So let me give you an example. I mean, legally speaking, or even constitutionally, if you like, matters that have to do with operations, if you're talking about the police, the IGP bears ultimate responsibility.
True.
The minister is responsible for policy.
Yeah.
He comes in at the level of policy. But one would ask the question, what happened with the operations? All right? Now, if it turns out that the inability of the police or the military to deal with the crowd professionally was because they lack adequate training, you know, a policy issue would crop up immediately. Mm-hmm. And that is where the minister would come into the picture. So it is too early in the day to say, look, let somebody knelt and fired into the crowd, and so you limit the focus of the investigation to only the military or the police officers. It has to be holistic for now. Yeah. As the investigation, unfolds.
You raise a very important point. Right now,
yes.
What is the most important thing, for example, for the families of the two people who are dead? They want somebody brought to book for killing their relative. That's what they want. I mean, and don't you see that is the president's intention in doing this in 10 days? Identify the responsibility so we can, if need be, again, the question about prosecutions is important. The Commission of Inquiry, we know that the legal, jurisprudence on that particular matter. It's been exhausted. How do you prosecute somebody if the recommendation, for example, from the Commission of Inquiry comes out? That's going to be an issue. But you can use
what happened during the Ayawaso West Wagon by-election.
Yeah,
the police had carried out their own investigation prior to the commencement of the work by the commission. And so the police, if they were minded to prosecute, could have proceeded to prosecute, even without recourse to the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry. But they refused to act. That's it. In the case of Ejura, I understand 2 people have already been arrested.
Yes.
Nothing stops the police from continuing with their own investigations.
Unfortunately,
remember that if they have to prosecute, the police or the Attorney General will prosecute on the basis of the docket that will be built and presented to them by the police.
Those arrested.
The Commission of Inquiry cannot build a docket for prosecution.
True, but those arrested have to do with the killing of the social media activists.
Yes.
But we are talking about the crowd control methods and strategy used by the military and the police yesterday that led to the killing of 2 people.
Yes.
We haven't arrested anybody,
Yes.
right? Because the people involved who fired were police officers. I'm saying that is what this public inquiry is supposed to look into. I'm saying for the people who have lost 2 of their relatives, they simply want that military officer, that police officer who did the firing held account and prosecuted if they
It's not that simple. I'm not too sure that the relatives of the victims are only interested in the prosecution of those who perpetrated.
They want to know who killed my relative.
Yes, that is one of their concerns for now. But I think that they would also be looking into the future. Of course. How can we ensure that next time, whatever happened in Ejura yesterday doesn't repeat itself?
I mean,
it will take a commission's work and the recommendations that would be made. If we have the political will to implement the recommendations that a commission of inquiry would make. Look, if we had implemented the Emil Short Commission recommendations in full, I'm sure most of the things that repeated at Ejura wouldn't have happened. Didn't the Emil Short Commission of Inquiry make recommendations regarding the use of live ammunition in crowd control situations?
They did.
They did. They did.
Yeah. Professionalism,
yes.
Training.
Yes. So I think that for now, let's not limit ourselves to the option of prosecution. But if the state security apparatus is minded, look, the military has its own standard procedures, operating procedures. And so whoever knelt and fired directly into the crowd, it can be fished out.
But the police...
It can be fished out and dealt with at that level.
But the military...
Even without the recourse to a commission's recommendations.
The military ultimately answers to the commander-in-chief. And if the commander-in-chief's committee recommends that a military officer is culpable, that direct...
Dr. Norman has enormous military experience. And will testify that even in the military, there are courts which deal with officers who misconduct themselves when they are deployed.
Yeah.
I've had occasion to defend quite a number at the court martials. And I tell you, some of the things that happen there, you won't believe it. So it's not as if, I mean, in military circles or even at the level of the police, they also have their service inquiry. Officers who disregard standard operating procedures can be dealt with. Okay, so, but that would only happen if the will is there to act.
So that's a big question now. Dr. Norman, so let me ask you, so I say this, that's all we have now to work with. 10 days the Minister of Interior has been giving. Is that time adequate?
Evans, it is not. They are going to say that the shooting happened under Article 3.2, control of crowd or a route. There is no way the people who were involved in the shooting are going to be found culpable. Because under that article, 13(2), the police can use force in defense of property, in defense of themselves, if somebody is escaping arrest, or for the purposes of suppressing a riot, insurrection, or mutiny. So under that provision, unless we have other standards for them to meet, Ghana doesn't have national decision-making model. The army doesn't have, the police doesn't have. A lot of institutions in the world, police institutions, they have. What is the purpose of it? It helps you to prepare for tactical operations like what happened at Ejura. It helps you to prepare for critical situations. In some communities, they call it the critical decision-making model. Unless we are going to expand this investigation into why up to today, over 60 years of policing in Ghana, we don't have a critical decision model to help the reasonable police officer to decide when is it necessary and reasonable to use force. Unless we do that, this event will keep happening over and over again. I think it's a failure on the part of the Ministry of Interior, and I'm not talking about the present one. It goes way back. The IGPs, because this is an operational thing. the IGP could have ordered for it to be designed for them to use in training of the police officers, for the army to have one. We have too many gaps in our security architecture, and this is one of them. Until we fill this gap and train, because the standard in the police operating procedure, as well as the army, is that the police officer on the beat has to make the decision whether in his reasonable subjective mind it is okay to use force. So the soldier who went in a crouching position to shoot, as if he's in a war front, he would say he saw the demonstrators with sticks, with knives, with stones, and he feared for himself. It is a subjective determination, and the determination doesn't happen post facto. It happens at the moment the officer made the decision to use force. So if you go to the use of force matrix, this officer is going to walk free, because to find him guilty will be wrong according to our constitution. It is a failure of the training. There are too many gaps in their training. We have to design a national decision-making model. We have to design a critical decision-making model, train the officers, and to be able to learn how to de-escalate. If the police were really properly trained, if the army was really properly trained, they should have used this escalation method to actually draw back the protesters and quell nerves at that moment. So I think this inquiry is not going to yield any substantial result for this country. It is going to be, okay, they did that, and it's going to be almost totally useless. The report is not going to be implemented, because to implement the report, there has to be a substantive basis to cause change. And that change has to come from a national architecture. The recently launched national security strategy made mention of critical thinking. Critical thinking is something we do in universities. Military organizations, police organizations do critical thinking all the time. So what level of critical thinking? You have to give them a standard by which they operate. And this must be carried out, I believe, together with the Email Short Commission's recommendations. If we could do that and retrain our police officers, our military officers, we should never let military officers go to quell demonstrations ever, because they are trained to shoot to kill. The first cognitive ability, or what they think about immediately they go to a site, is who am I going to take out right now? They've been shooting against silhouettes, against mud, most of us. Now they have real people that they can shoot at. In our military, people can spend their entire profession without seeing action. It is in situations like this that they can practice shooting how to kill real human beings. Don't ever make the mistake of putting people who are killing machines, weaponized to kill human beings, into these kind of situations. Is the fault of the people who deploy them. They dissect. It is our fault, the political system. It is the community that it selects a few people to be vetted by the presidency, whichever president is in power. So they select the DCE. The DCEs come with absolutely zero knowledge about security. The MCEs are not military, ex-military people. They don't understand security. And you make them chairmen of security entities. That is wrong. That is totally wrong. So these are mitigating circumstances, which the accuser can say, you know what, I was only following orders, and when I went there, I felt threatened, and because of that, I shot. Simple. You cannot find him guilty.
Okay. Dr. Norman, there's a lot there to process, but I must say, you've touched on something that we've already seen the beginnings of. Yesterday, when the police issued a statement, they said the protesters charged on the military and the police with firearms. So already, they've already started indicating to you what their defense is going to be, and which is what you have just zeroed in on. I'm going to take a break. When I return, so where do we go from here? I mean, there are bigger issues that we've touched on briefly, but I want to end with that because there was Ayawaso West Wagon. We saw people from the National Security Secretariat, SWAT team in military fatigue, fire into the crowd. We saw that and we captured that. We were before the commission to testify. We handed that over. And indeed, in the recommendation, they recommended that that should not happen again. Well, it's happened again. This is the second time in 6 months. Or was it 7 months? Because in December it happened, right? Military again to deal with the crowd. In Techiman, people died. 7 months on, it's happened again. We'll deal with that when we return. You're still with us here on PMXS. My guest is Mr. Agaga, who, of course, is the ranking on the Defense and Interior. Dr. Ishmael Norman, analyst. We're expected to have the majority, the deputy majority leader, who was supposed to join us, but we don't have him. But we can proceed to look at the bigger issues that may have led to what happened yesterday. So, Mr. Gaga, so we saw the Ayawaso West Wagon. You've touched on the fact that they recommended solutions to this problem that we're witnessing. And as I just indicated, this is the second time in 7 months that we've seen military intervention in dealing with, civilian crowds that has led to people dying. Obviously, we haven't learned our lessons. You've said the inquiry won't yield any results. So what do we do? The president has already gone this way. The inquiry might not happen, but at least you are in parliament, so maybe you can. That is an avenue to compel some other different form of inquiry.
It's not too late for the president to make a U-turn.
No, that's not going to happen.
No, but it's not too late at all. If the president's goal is to see to say some reformation in the way and manner crowds are controlled by security personnel, he should make a U-turn and set up a commission of inquiry under Article 278. There is some leeway for parliamentary intervention in the setting up of commissions of inquiry. We would explore those avenues and see whether we can force the president's hand.
But there's no guarantee, even if he does that he will implement the commission's recommendation.
Well, so the whole issue boils down to
political will.
Political will. You can have all the good, recommendations, but look, as far back as '96, Justice Philip Archer, a commission of inquiry, yes. Some of the things we're witnessing here, crowd control, and the need to use guns as a last resort when the lives of the officers are in danger, as an exceptional case for the use of live ammunition. All those things were discussed.
I mean, so you cite this
as far back as 1996.
96. So this has been...
But it's over the period we haven't had the political will.
This is almost 3 decades, right? We are talking about. And we're back to the same point decades on.
Yes.
It doesn't reinforce the point that a public inquiry is not the solution. Commission of inquiry is not the solution. Something else needs to happen other than these two approaches.
Look, Dr. Norman spoke extensively about the need for critical thinking to be institutionalized in police operating procedures and standards. But how do we do that? He made reference to the national security strategy, which was recently launched by the president. Now, in that document, clearly, it is envisaged that a national policing policy would be developed from the national security strategy, okay, I'm sure that should be done with dispatch so that most of the things Dr. Norman talked about can find expression in a new national policing strategy. That is the way to deal with some of the issues that we are confronted with now. We saw how, well, in Ayawaso, those men in khaki were not actually police officers. They were hoodlums. But at least in Ejura, I have no cause to think that they were hoodlums. All right, some of them clearly, from the way they were dressed, were police officers and military personnel. Right. So we need to deal with the matter holistically. Let's address the problems in a holistic way. But to do that, recommendations do matter. I don't want us to sit here and rubbish recommendations because they do matter. The only time you can rubbish recommendations is if they are not well thought out.
Let me ask you the parliamentary question now, because this is where we are with it. Is there a way in which, is there a thinking in Parliament among yourselves at the committee level possibly and among your colleagues that Parliament will also want to have a say in how this is resolved going forward?
Yes. Evangelist, so if you look at the law, I don't want to preempt whatever steps would be taken, but I mean, if you look at the law carefully, you'd find that actually there is room for Parliament to make some interventions. 2783, which says Parliament by resolution may request that a commission of inquiry be appointed to inquire into any matter.
Okay, so you can also have a commission of inquiry, but initiated by Parliament?
No. So if Parliament passes a resolution,
okay,
in a way, Parliament would be presenting that resolution passed to the President. And when that happens, his hands are tied.
Okay.
His hands are tied. He must, at that point, appoint a commission of inquiry to look into the matter.
Isn't there already a motion that attempts to do this?
No, presently there is no such motion.
Okay.
But like I said, these are
Is that an option
part of the options we are exploring.
Let me give a final word to Dr. Norman. Dr. Norman, so back to the main fundamental issue. He's gone back to the 1996 very famous commission of inquiry. We talk about Yawaso. We are having another public inquiry. Isn't it the problem political will? And I mean, no matter what we do with these inquiries, it won't work. We should try a different approach.
We should try a different approach, and it's also a problem of political will, but it's also a political will, which is the burden of it, of which is on the IGP. The IGPs that have run this Ghana's police and the various top brass of the army, they are too protective of their positions, and they are not thinking outside of the box. They don't want to fall on their sword for Ghana, because there's nothing that is stopping them to actually improve police training. Not just to show them how to shoot and kill, how to dress up, how to put on uniform and salute people, but basically how to do real modern day policing. I think Parliament should compel this event to happen, the Commission of Inquiry, and for us to expand the basis of policing in terms of skills, in terms of training, in terms of preparing them to handle emergencies, critical situations, and events like this.
Okay.
We are talking too much. I have seen it too many times. I've read the Archer report, the Ryan report. There are so many reports out there, and we are constantly having a conversation. We are not moving forward. We need to move forward. Somebody needs to fall on his sword. If the IGP is not being listened to, he should quit the job and stop protecting himself. It is just horrible that we don't have brave men in Ghana who can take brave actions in the interest of Ghana.
Dr. Norman, great to have you on the show. Enjoyed every bit of your insights into this matter. Mr. Gaga, I'm grateful that you joined me also. All the best. We'll see if this proposition in the Constitution is something that Parliament takes up. Enjoy the rest of your evening. you.